All right. Hello, everyone. So my name's Ashi. I'm the instructor. I'm one of the junior instructors at Grace Hopper right now. And I'm here to talk about React, which is really exciting because I really like React. Um, I've I've learned like a lot of front-end frameworks over the years, and React is so far my favorite. Okay. Can you all see my desktop?
Yep.
Great. Okay. So we're gonna start, so there's two ways we typically introduce things here. One is by having like a long lecture with a lot of like historical context into like, here's all these different web frameworks and here's how they work. And another is to just kind of like dive in and show you the thing that you're actually going to be using. So I'm gonna try doing the latter because I sort of think React works differently enough from most other web frameworks that talking about them is kind of a distraction. um, that said, like there are going to be times when I call out like, okay, so this is like where we might see this pattern that we're seeing in React historically as well. So here I've set up my repository. I've kind of already prepared it with a Webpack config, not unlike what you've seen before, just with a little bit more crap in it. Um, Webpack configs, in fact, most configs tend to sort of accrue extra stuff over time. This line turns on source maps so that you can actually get your stack traces to show you an error location inside your code rather than inside like line 2000 of some bundle. There's various other flags in this file. We don't really have to worry about it. You're pretty much always going to be provided with a webpack.config. And when you have to make your own, that will be sort of a coming of age day when you must go into the wilderness and learn what every single one of these things mean. That day is not today. So I have started my React app with this main.jsx. That's the entry point we specified in our Webpack config. And I haven't done anything, so I'm not really expecting anything to happen. And so far, React is really meeting my expectations. Without doing anything, nothing happens. Great. So first things first, I need to import React. Import React from React. This is something you need to do in basically every file where you use JSX, which looks like this. So this is weird. This is weird because this is not like traditional JavaScript syntax, right? It is a new kind of syntax called JSX, which lets us put things that look like HTML into our JavaScript. And what React is going to do is it's going to turn these tags, these JSX tags, into a JavaScript data structure. So let's see what that data structure looks like. Okay, so I just like console logged an h1. Let me put something inside of it. Okay, so my h1 tag has a few properties. It's got this like type of thing which looks like it just sort of identifies it as a React element. It has a key, a ref, like some other stuff, and it has props. And inside of its props are its children, namely anything that I put inside of it, which currently is just a string hello world. So there's obviously like a bit more structure and whatnot going on in here, but this is the basic structure of a JSX element. So if I put another tag in here, and reload often enough, yeah. So now we can see that like if I've nested a tag, I get this nested data structure where the children of my outer tag include both this string and before that, this whole nested bold tag. So that's great, but how do we put this on the page? Well, it turns out React has a method for that. What is that method? I think it's like render from React DOM. I'm gonna bet it's that method. And let's see. Oh, it is, great. Here I'm relying on my editor being very helpful and telling me that there is a render method, and it takes, what does it take? An element, which is a React DOM element, and then a container, which is just a normal DOM element. So we'll talk about like precisely what those things mean, but first let's just get this thing rendering. So this string of JSX is my React virtual DOM element. And then I need to have somewhere on the page where I can render this to. So I think if I look in my HTML, my public HTML, I have this div that's just empty that I'm gonna have React render into. So I can say, as my second thing, document.get element by ID main. Hey, that's pretty cool. Okay, so let's go through the steps of what just happened here. We've like sort of created these React elements by putting JSX tags in our JavaScript file. These elements sort of form the backbone of how React lets us interact with the page. So they look like HTML tags, but they are turned into things that are not quite full DOM elements. All JSX elements have is some information about like what text they contain, what elements they contain, and what kind of tag they are. So we can in fact go and look and see what this string of code gets compiled into. So I'm just gonna look for, oh God, there's so much stuff in our bundle. Let's just look for hello. There we go. Okay, and let's look at these side by side. So what Babel has done here, and it's Babel doing the transpiling, is it's converted this string of HTML looking stuff into this string of calls to react.createElement. And react.createElement returns that data structure that we saw earlier, which is a way of representing what we would like the web page to look like without going to all the trouble of constructing the whole web page. The reason React does this is because it has this, it has a very particular way that for you to change data on the page. In React, instead of manipulating the DOM directly, so like in Trip Planner, we were like adding properties to and like removing properties from actual DOM elements, and we were like adding and removing actual DOM elements from the page. At some point, React will do that, but React sets it up so that it is doing that for us, and all we ever do is write functions and classes that return these virtual DOM strings, these descriptions of what we want the page to look like. And then React takes those and runs them through a reconciliation process with what's already on the page and makes the minimum number of changes to make the page look like what we said it should look like. So it's giving us a huge amount of power in the background and sort of hiding it away so that all we have to do is call render on some JSX, and it'll know to render it to the page. And in fact, we don't have to call render all that often because React has the notion of how its own components can change what they should look like. So let's take a look at that. So right now I'm rendering this like constant string of JSX into the page. There's no way it can change, and I wouldn't expect it to. But what if I want something that's going to change? Like what if I wanted hello to become goodbye within like 1 second? So if we were doing this in the DOM, we might say something like, okay, I'm gonna set a timeout, and after it takes the handler first. And I'm going to say that like, if I have jQuery, you can do like make all H1s, or I guess make all B tags have the text goodbye. And you can sort of, this is not going to work because we have to pull in jQuery, and I don't want to do that. You can sort of imagine, and Trip Planner hopefully gave you a taste of the fact that if you have lines of code that are like this all over the place, you're going to end up having a lot of different pieces of code trying to manipulate the same state. Like every piece of code on your front end is going to be trying to add and remove things from the DOM, which means that there's a pretty high likelihood that if we have a big enough app, they're going to step on each other. So what we want to do is find a way to compartmentalize the parts, the things that our code needs to know about. Like this incorrect timeout, this now correct timeout, is actually scanning the whole document for bold tags in order to change the text of this one. So this, for example, is obviously not going to work if we like had many bold tags on the page. So what React gives us is a way to create components which change. So like H1 tags, bold tags, their content, like they always do a constant thing. But we can make a tag, we can make our own tags under React, and they can do whatever we want. So let's try, instead of rendering this whole string, let's render a greeting. And now let's define what a greeting is. If we try and run our code right now, I'm going to get an error because greeting is not defined, obviously. But this should actually tell you something. And what it should tell you is that this string, this part of a JSX tag, is going to get looked up like a variable. And in fact, if we look at the generated code, we can see that the code that's generated here has an actual reference to like a greeting thing, some JavaScript object that represents the greeting component. These are called components in React. If we change this to like an H1 again, notice that it's not generating a reference to some H1 variable, but instead is saying like this is a tag, a literal H1 HTML tag. It might seem like magic. It's actually not magic. It's a very stupid rule that works very well, which is that if this is capitalized, it's treated as a class, or it's treated as a component with that has been named as a JavaScript variable. And if it is not, then it's treated as an HTML tag. So let's make a greeting. So in React, one way to make a greeting, I'm just going to do this old style. One way to make a component is by just writing a function. So we can write a function. The function is going to take props, which are all these things. So now I'm passing in hello, or I'm passing in a prop named say. The value is hello. And I can make my greeting return props.say. And right. So React is now complaining that a valid React element or null must be returned. I may have returned undefined, an array, or some other invalid object. What did I return? Oh, can I hear anything? Oh, okay.
I guess a string.
Yeah, so I returned a string. I should return a JSX element. And the way people usually handle this is to just wrap the thing in an unadorned div, which turns it into a React virtual DOM element without doing very much to it. This is not going to work exactly as I had hoped, though. So that's unfortunate. What I actually want is to interpolate the value of props.say, and I can do that by wrapping it in curly brackets. Okay, so now I have sort of a customizable message. I can be like, hello, Ashi, and my robot, there we go. And my robot does the right thing. So that's great, but it's still not precisely dynamic. Like this tag is never going to change what it produces for a given set of input. So that's maybe not very surprising, right? Like we're writing it as a function. It's like taking all this, it's taking like all this data as props, in this case, just one prop, and it's producing some output. And for a given collection of input, it is always going to produce the same output. So this is what we call a stateless or dumb component. Always produces the same output for the same set of props. Another way of putting this is that it is a pure function of props. So when we have components that are like that, we write them as functions. But if we want, let's say I want some different behavior. Let's say I want to have this turn into goodbye when I click on it, when I click anywhere on the greeting. So now I need something that has a state as a part of it. And for that, I need to write a class. So let's say I have a greeting and what is the term for when you say goodbye? Greeting and goodbye. That's what we're doing. Okay, so this is another way of expressing a React component. And it gives us a little bit more power in that we now have this internal notion of the state of this component that we can use when we render. So let's first get it doing the right thing for right now. So I can define a render method. And this render method is basically the same thing as this function, except that instead of taking props, it has access to this.props. So I can return greeting. Here I'm going to use my component, my dumb component inside my smart component. And I'm going to say hello. Okay, so now my I've like added a layer to my React virtual DOM tree. The top level element is now this greeting and goodbye class. So when React tries to render this, it goes and renders this class, which means it calls its render method. Its render method inside of that calls greeting, or it returns greeting. React applies the same reconciliation process again, so it goes and calls greeting, and it creates this div with this data. If we wanted, so we're right now passing in this prop, say, let's call it greeting, and we're not using it at all. So if we want to use it, we can do that like this. So now we're passing this prop down to our inner component, and we should be able to see hello, Ashi. There we go, when I reload the page. So that's cool. That's working. The last thing we need, so the last thing I said we wanted to do was have this become goodbye when I click on it. So to do that, we need to introduce this concept of state, and React components sort of support it naturally. So there are several methods I can implement on this class in order to change its behavior. One of them is component did mount. And another one is I can give it a constructor. So in the constructor, one of the things we can do is we can set the state. And here I'll just set it to empty. And another thing that we must do is call the superclass. So whenever you have a constructor inside an ES6, remember that you need to call the superclass constructor. Otherwise, you can't use this inside your constructor. And probably it will throw at some point. If we don't have this line of code, line 15, I think we'll see that the build is failing. Yeah. And it fails with a really great error, actually. This is not allowed before super inside the constructor. So we have to do it because the superclass constructor is the thing that initializes the state of this object. Okay, so we have broken nothing so far. So in component did mount, we can do things. It's occurring to me that I don't actually have anything to do in here, but I do kind of want to talk about it. So this gets called when the component is first attached to the page. So if we just log something in here, we're going to see that we get one component did mount no matter how many times we draw this. And right now this is drawing only once, so that's not very impressive, but we're going to see that even as we change the state of this, or even as we change the state of this component, forcing it to redraw, it's not going to remount as well. Okay, so now I've said the word state like 50 times. Let's talk about how React handles state. So one thing I can do, React components have a set state method. So I can call like this.set state, and I'm going to say that the state of this component is that it is either saying hello or it's saying goodbye. So I'm going to track whether it is saying hello by having this saying hello key on the state. And then in here, I can say if this.state.saying hello, we can return this greeting. Otherwise, I could make another dumb component, but this dumb component is already a little bit dumb. So I'm going to say return goodbye. Okay, so if we, let's flip the sense of this check so that we can get into this branch and verify that something is happening. Okay, so something is happening. Now we just need to set the state of this component somehow. To do that, the only place where we can say this.state equals is in the constructor. Everywhere else, we have to say this.setState. And the reason is that React doesn't just do a simple object assignment. It actually sets some flags that this component is dirty, is the term. This component has changed its state and needs to re-render. So one time we might want to change our state is when the thing we're rendering gets clicked. So we can attach listeners to React virtual DOM elements in much the same way that we can attach them to actual DOM elements. Which, if you didn't know that this is a way you can do that, it is. For actual DOM elements, it's actually not preferred. We typically don't want to pass in event handlers like this. For React elements, it is the preferred and, in fact, the only way. You should, if you want to listen for an event on a component, you usually listen to it like on click or like on mouse down, as you'll recall from Worldwide Whiteboard. Any of these things will capture that appropriate event stream, and then we need to do something in here. So let's say this dot was clicked, and this is going to be a bit of a problem. So let's use because this won't be defined. So if we use an arrow, we will capture the value of this. And then if I use an arrow, I have to call it. So now if I write a was clicked function, I can note that I was clicked. Oh, I think I know the problem here. Yeah, so this is not working. This is actually kind of good. It's not working because I'm passing onClick to this greeting, but the greeting isn't doing anything with it, right? Like it's going to get onClick as a prop. I can even log it here. So here, it got the 2 props that I gave to it, but then it just drops the onClick on the floor. What it should probably actually do is put it onto something. So here we're going to wire this event listener through so that when I click on this div, this component gets a message. So let's see if that works. There is a problem. The problem is that this is not a thing inside of this function. Okay, cool. So now I'm getting these click events. It's like I click here and eventually was clicked gets called. Are there any questions about what we've gone through so far? Okay. I'm going to keep going.
Actually,
Oh, yeah.
when you are extending React.component, what is React.component?
Oh, good question. So React.component is it's like the base class for React components. So when React gets, so like when we call render on a React JSX component tree, or sorry, on a React virtual DOM tree, which is what this is, React goes through and during the reconciliation process, it's like, okay, the page currently looks like this, whatever is inside of main. I should make it look like this, which is like whatever we specified. And in order to do that, it goes and walks this tree data structure. So again, if we look at that data structure, here we go. So it goes and walks along this and is like, okay, what I got a React virtual DOM node. The type of this node is this greeting and goodbye function, which I notice is a React component. So I'm going to instantiate it and then call its render method in order to figure out what I should actually do. And so it does that, and then like during the reconciliation process, and then it goes and looks at the children that this class renders. So it looks at like whatever it rendered and does the same process. So that's how React components get instantiated. And then the React component class itself, I wonder if we have, yeah, that's something. It provides us with some functionality that lets us hook into React. So one of the things it provides is, okay, so it obviously has this constructor that takes props. It also has a set state methods and this render method, which must return a JSX element. If this file is confusing to you, that's because when I clicked on, I did a command click on React.component, and my editor took me to the type definitions for React.component, which are done in TypeScript. So these are, TypeScript is a lot like JavaScript. You'll notice this looks like JavaScript, but it has some syntactic extensions that let you say what types things are expected to take and return. So here it's very clear that render is returning a JSX element. And that in fact is how my editor knows that when I like type render or something here, what I should take and what I should return. It's how my autocomplete is working. Does that help? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, great. Okay, so we were about to have our first component working. Where were we in that process? Let's find out. Okay, so we were at I was clicked. So instead of just printing something, now we want to actually change the state of this component. So I want to change my state so that saying hello is not saying hello. Maybe I should actually just make it false for now. Cool. So now I have this thing that works once. If I did want to make a toggle back and forth, I could do is not saying hello. And then I'd want to wrap the whole thing. I would either want to add an on-click listener here, saying hello is not defined. Oh, right, this should be this dot state dot. Or if you find yourself binding listeners like this in two places, probably you want there to be a container that is doing the listening. And perhaps we can just interpolate this whole if statement. My editor is not very happy, and I think this is probably not going to work, but let's try it. Oh yeah, module build failed. That's not right. Unexpected token on line 34, and what's happening here is it's saying an expression is expected. So what I'm running into here is the fact that you cannot have statements inside of JSX interpolations. And the reason is sort of maybe more clear if we look at the bundle. Let's again find this. It's like saying hello. Oh, sorry, it's still failing. No. So I'm going to fix this, and then we can go look at like what was happening and why this fixed it. So one thing I can do is I can wrap this in a function. And then call that function. And in here we can see, okay, so first of all, I think that's working. That should be working. No. If I'm saying hello, shouldn't need this anymore. Okay, so a valid React element or null must be returned. I have this strong feeling. Oh, thank you. Yeah, so you have to return from methods that are not arrows. Okay, great. Okay, so now I have a toggling thing that has this like div around it. Okay, so why was this necessary, and what did it accomplish? Let's answer the second question first. So by turning this into a function and then calling it, I've created a immediately invoked function expression, which emphasis on the expression part. Because if we go into the bundle and look at, so this is the create class part. Okay, here is where we are rendering. Actually, I guess we want to do it up here. Yeah. Okay, so here is our class, and here is our render method as it's been compiled. And if we look at this part, so this is the function that I wrote. It's been turned from an arrow function into a function. And it is inside of the arguments list to react.createElement, which means that you can't put an if statement here for the same reason you can't put an if statement in here. I mean, it might be cool if you could, right? But we have a different syntactic element for that, and that element is the ternary. So in here, we might also do, oops, something like this. Otherwise, oops. Okay, great. Okay, so that, believe it or not, is like 80% of what there is to know about React. How does all that feel? Now is the time to reflect, and I can take some questions.
Would you mind going over a little bit again about the event handler for this?
About the what handler for this?
Yeah, I'm sorry, the event handlers.
Yeah.
Just kind of quickly from kind of start to be, from start to end.
Yep, absolutely. So any HTML tag that, any JSX HTML tag, so these lowercase things, will accept event handlers. And you put event handlers on it by passing in the name as a prop, or by passing in on and then the name of the event as a prop. React has a lot of supported events. Let's find them. So I might be looking at the wrong page here. No, this is most of them. So on key down, on key press, on key up, on focus, on blur, basically all of the events that you would find in the web API, React has in this form. And unlike the web API, there is no way to be like, let some tag equals like div, and then say some tag.add event listener. So this won't work. And the reason it won't work is that some tag at this point is not really anything interesting. It's this React virtual DOM tree. And React virtual DOM trees are designed to be stupid, very cheap to produce, like they're cheap to create, and easy to diff, easy to like do this reconciliation process on. They don't have really any notion of themselves about like events and event streams. So when you're passing in this onClick prop, what eventually happens is like when React finally reconciles this element and creates an actual DOM element for it, it attaches listeners in the right place. Also useful is that when this element dies, like say greeting and goodbye leaves the page, or in fact, greeting leaves the page at some point because the state of this component changes. And when that happens, this listener is removed.
Can you explain a bit more about why it was necessary to wrap that in an arrow function?
Inside here?
The event handler, right. So like on click, you're saying arrow function, this was clicked instead of just
so if we just do this, I think what's going to happen here is that, the this.setState is going to fail because was clicked looks like it might come back as a bound method, but doesn't because JavaScript doesn't really bind functions by default. So now if I click, it's like cannot read property set state of null because this is undefined, or sorry, this is undefined in this context. So one way of solving that is to use an arrow function and use it for its special abilities to capture this from the containing scope. Another thing we can do is—
Well, wait, so this dot was clicked still tried to run. So this that's in that on line 38, this worked, right?
Yeah, so that works. So this dot was clicked. Here, let's, when this component did mount, I'm going to say window dot high equals this. And this will give us the ability to play with this component in the debugger or in the console. Okay, so high, great. So high dot was clicked is totally a thing, right? Like this clearly has meaning. Sorry, this keyword clearly has meaning within the render function. And this expression, this dot was clicked, is being evaluated the first time the render function is run, or it's like evaluated, sorry, every time the render function is run. And so this dot was clicked is going to be a function. But it's not going to be a bound function. So this inside of was clicked is going to not refer to anything when we call it. Does that make sense? Because it's going to get looked up inside of this and then lose its connection to it. So we can wrap it in an anonymous function in order to, basically in order so that when we call was clicked, this is on the right side of the dot, left-hand side of the dot. Another way we can handle this is to explicitly bind it. So we can say this dot was clicked is this dot was clicked dot bind to this. So now, for every time we create one of these components, we're going to bind the was clicked method. And now this dot was clicked is going to be bound. And so we should be able, first of all, we should get a different thing when we log it, and then the click event should work. So let's go and look and see what that does. Okay, so we don't noticeably get a different thing, which is unfortunate, but now this function is in fact bound. I wonder if there's a way of asking, like, if a function dot is bound. No, it's not a thing. Okay, but now our click listener is working. Another way we can handle it is to say was clicked equals an arrow function here. I'm gonna keep that there.
So the way that classes work, I thought that like under the hood, was clicked will be a method that lives on an object called greeting and goodbye, right?
Yeah, so under the hood, yeah.
So if that's true, so greeting and goodbye dot was clicked is now a method, and methods get this context from normally from the object that they live on, right?
That last part is not true.
Okay.
Methods aren't specially bound to their instances any more than things you just put on the prototype, because in fact they are just functions put on the prototype.
It's their call site where they are invoked, and usually it's like object dot method, just like we were talking about this morning.
Yeah. So when I make this function, I've sort of cleverly constructed my code so that the correct object is on the left-hand side of the dot. And the only reason this has to be an arrow is so that the value of this inside of the arrow is correct, whereas the value of this inside of a function would not be. The reason this works is actually similar. We are again inside of an arrow, so this is going to refer to the whole class. This is like newish syntax that you may not have seen before, but anything that you initialize here with like name equals some value inside of a class, it's as though we put it in the constructor and said this dot. So as shorthand, and to avoid having to write a constructor, we can just put it out here. So if I look at, was it hi.foo, it's 2. And if I look at hi.wasClicked, it's this function. And if I just call it, I can change the state of my React component. You incidentally should not probably ever do this except for debugging. Going in and manipulating the state of your React components from some other code is probably not the best strategy. Typically, you want to have your components communicate by passing down props, which may include listeners, which lets you pass data back up the tree. Does that get to the center of your question?
I don't know why you're doing that. I just am going to accept that it is necessary. And I will plan to do some debugging when I have this problems.
Yeah, yeah, I would explore it a little bit. If you don't do either of these things, the short answer is like you end up with wasClicked being unbound and not being able to access this inside of it. Okay. Other questions? I keep switching over to this desktop, which is useless because this desktop, I can't see you all. So sorry about that. Okay. So if there are no more questions, let's talk about the whole life cycle of a component. So in order to do this, I'm going to make goodbye a class that is a class component. And I'm going to have it first. Let's render its we'll have it render all of its children inside of an H1. So this should now have the same behavior that we had before. Ooh, definitely not. I really don't like the return keyword today. Okay, same behavior we had before. And now I'm gonna have this print like all of its lifecycle methods. That's not true. There's a lot of lifecycle methods that React exposes. We're just gonna talk about a couple of them for now. So one of them is component did mount. And in component did mount, you typically do one-time initialization. So the most common thing is Ajax requests go here. If you want to fetch some data from the server, and we're gonna like go through an example of this, but if you wanna fetch some data from the server and then render it, you want to do the fetch inside of component did mount. There is, as you might expect, component will unmount. So let's log that one. And I think the only one that I can think of that is semi-commonly used is component will receive props. So incoming, outgoing. And here I'm using these like % format strings to just grab the other arguments and put them inside this pattern. So let's see what we get here. Okay, so we can see that like when I click on hello, here, let's clear the console. Okay, so when I click on my greeter and goodbye component, it's going to change what it's rendering. So when I change what I'm rendering, React, as part of the reconciliation process, goes and mounts any new components. So when I click on that, I get a goodbye component did mount. And we can go and sort of look inside this component. It's got some context. It's got props and state, importantly. Those are the things that you'll be getting off your component the most. And then when I click on it again, I get a component will unmount. And greeting did receive props is not what I think it is, right? I'm printing it from somewhere else. Yeah, that's just happening in here. Okay, so if I want to, oh, and I guess we are never sending different props down to goodbye. We could change that. Let's have it, we're gonna change its children in a second. Let's do that. So we'll say that instead of just rendering goodbye, we wanna render goodbye and then a second later, please go away, to indicate that the user should like leave our site forever. So let's make that message part of our state. So we'll be like this dot state dot go away. So we're gonna start it as goodbye. And then when we were clicked, we're going to set the state, that's fine. But then we also want to say that in a second, we're going to make our goodbye message more aggravating. So I believe the way we can do that is by saying set timeout, make message meaner. And we'll do that in, let's say, half a second, so 500 milliseconds. So now we need a make message meaner method. This, again, because we are passing it in as a handler, we should make sure that it's bound. And we'll say that let's look at the current message. Go away. Goodbye. We're going to say this dot set state. Go away to please leave now. Okay. So now when I click on this, it should politely tell me goodbye, and then it should rather rudely tell me goodbye. Let's see if that works. Great. And as part of that, hopefully, yeah, we can see that goodbye now does receive new props. So previously, its props were kind of hard to look at here. I'm gonna do a little trick. Something that's happening right now is that you should actually really be aware of is that when I expand this object in the Chrome DevTools, I get this little eye icon next to it. And it tells me that the value below was evaluated just now. When you log objects into the console, they come out sort of contracted, and they don't expand until the moment you click the arrow, which means that if the object has changed, which I believe this old props object has probably changed and been destroyed or cleared out or like prepared for reuse, then you're not going to see the value at this moment in time, which can be very confusing. So in order to definitely get the value at this moment in time, there's probably some console method I can call to do it. Another thing I can do is I can just say JSON.stringify these things. Incoming. Outgoing. And this comma 0, comma 2, which I think should actually be null, comma 2, that causes it to be nicely indented. Okay, so now when I click on this, yeah, so the previous props, it still thinks was empty. I think because this .props.children is not something that can go into JSON, unfortunately. But then we can see that after changing the state, we get like the new props, which say like, okay, please leave now. So these are in order of usefulness. You will use component did mount all the time. Component will unmount somewhat less often, but sometimes you need to clean something up before your component dies. That's where this goes. So cleanup code goes here. And then in component, we'll receive props. If you've done anything special based on your props. So for example, setting like the URL of an image based on this .props user profile image, you'll need to do it again here because the props will have changed. Cool. All right, so any questions thus far? Okay. Let's do one more thing. We're getting close to lunch, I think. Yeah, we're getting super close to lunch. I want to show one more thing. Sorry that we're going to run like a little bit into lunch. And that thing I want to show is how to load data from the server and put it into a React component. So I have not prepared data for us really. So let's, I guess we could use the favicon. That's kind of interesting. Let's just use the bundle.js. We'll do that. And what we'll do is we'll have this goodbye element render, instead of rendering this .props.children, it's going to render just render a pre-tag with this bundle code inside of it. So I actually said I want to change goodbye, but let's actually leave goodbye as an example class that shows off component lifecycle methods. And we'll create a new class that's like, let's call it, what should we call this? I want to call it a quine. And I'll let you look up what a quine is and figure out why I wanted to call it that. But it's some component that's going to extend React.component. And this is going to load our own source code from the server and display it. Okay, so in our render method, we're going to return a pre-tag with this.state.code inside of it. And in our constructor, this, ooh, did I do that right? Yeah. So this syntax I'm using, I think you've seen it before probably. It's it collects like all of the arguments that were passed to constructor and then sort of just passes them along to super using the rest and the spread operator respectively. This is a nice way to pass along anything that the superclass constructor might want that I was handed and don't really care about. Sometimes you'll also see this. This is actually kind of incorrect. If you want to explicitly name them, you should also pass in the context. That is actually more complexity than you need to worry about when writing your own constructor, so I just do this. And I'm going to start our state by saying code is loading. And let's, instead of goodbye, we'll show the code. So Quine. Okay, so now I'm just saying loading. That's great, but that's not really, it's not really what I want. It's nice that we have it though. So now I'm gonna actually load the code. So in component did mount, I'm going to make an AJAX request. There's like a bunch of ways to make AJAX requests. I'm going to use fetch for the moment because I know we have it and it's pretty simple. So I can fetch our bundle and then I will get a response and yeah, and it has a text method. So I'm going to call that, which will give me a promise. If we look at this, rsp.text returns the promise of a string. So I'm going to implicitly return it in that then, and then say, now I've got the code and I can do this dot set state code. Code, or I can shorten this with ES6 shortened object property syntax to just code. My Mac's about to sleep and you're about to eat. So now when I click on this, hopefully we'll see loading for a split second and then see the code. No. Oh, yes, that's fabulous. So I saw an error here for a second. Can only update a mounted or mounting component. This means I called set state on an unmounted component, which is weird because I definitely didn't do that. I did this in did mount. Let's see if this error happens again. Oh yeah, it's totally happening right now. Can I not? This is confusing to me because Quine, I don't understand like why it's even been mounted. It's happening in set state. It's happening on line 56. Yeah, that's great, but why were you mounted at this point? Do you have a power? Thank you. This is surprising. Quine is receiving its did mount event here. Thank you. before it even gets onto the page. Let's try, okay, that's fine. You can take people out. Okay. So now we definitely shouldn't get it. Okay, now we're definitely not getting a did mount. And now we are again. That's interesting. Perhaps the reconciler mounts things a little bit earlier than I thought. Okay, I think we'll leave that as a mystery because it's sort of going down this rabbit hole is obscuring the general point, which is that we do actually have a working component. When I click on this, it says loading for a second and then loads our entire bundle. Okay, so that's the last part of React that you need for this workshop. Any questions?
Yeah, are you gonna post this code somewhere?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll put it in your library.
And also, like, how about this video so we can go through some of your comments?
Yep, the video should, I think, also go into the library. Yep, Kate is nodding. Wait, you can see that Kate is nodding.
Thank you.
Yep.
And I'm gonna Slack out your pairs in just a little bit. We're gonna, since there are only 6 of you, something that I've been trying to work with Full Stack Onsite is to get a couple people to see if they want to pair with you all. And we have one person today. I just have been messaging them since Friday. So we're going to start seeing if we can do that a little bit, just to give you a heads up. But I'll Slack out the partners. And the workshop's open, and I opened the repo. And you guys should take lunch, but I'll put you into your room so that you can start whenever you want to start. Sounds good. I've got some office hours today, tomorrow, and Wednesday. You all, I think, are signed up with me now, and we are 10 minutes behind, so I might like cut them all by like 5 minutes today or something. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see what happens, but I'll see you guys in a sec.
Thanks, Ashi.
Bye, everyone.
That's great.
Yeah,
Thanks.
thank
Yeah,
you.
it was great to meet you. Thank you.
Thanks.